Guys, welcome back to another episode of Faith Unraveled, where we discuss the chapter of life after a big awakening. I'm Alicia, this is Jamie, and we're going to address some questions mostly around active believing family members and how to grapple with that difficult dynamic. You've deconstructed, your family members have not. How do you handle family events? How do you handle friendships? How do you tell your kids that you're leaving the church? So these are some of the questions that we've gotten this week. They're really good ones and shared by the majority of the people in our community.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really good for a lot of people because I think most people who deconstruct have some sort of situation with their family, siblings, their kids.
I would say the only ones who don't are those who join the church as converts. And then when they deconstruct, their families just more or less, they're waiting for them. So
yeah, I would even say that people who have left the church without deconstructing, we have friends who have done that like at a young age where it didn't fit with them real well. They even feel this a bit. They feel a little bit of an outside.
Absolutely. I can't say enough about deconstructing. You're absolutely right. There's so many people that just the church never really worked for them, but they didn't necessarily deconstruct. They kind of just went inactive. Yeah. And I've got a number of friends that have reached out, as have you, that say, oh my God, I left the church in high school and I've never taken the time to disassemble this stuff. And it can be really healing.
What's interesting is I've seen with a number of those people who have stepped out because it didn't fit, they don't understand the harm of the church. Like, we have some siblings in that realm and we have some friends in that realm. And when we've talked to them in the past about the harm within the church, they haven't really seen it because they really never deconstructed Mormonism.
Yeah, I think you have to get close enough to it to actually experience the harm or to even witness the harm.
Well, and what I saw is when they left at such a young age, they still loved it. They loved the youth programs. They saw how it talked about Jesus Christ. And so the harm that they didn't see is like losing their life choices because they left at such a young age. They never lost the ability to make decisions.
And there might be something to say too about people who never watched General Conference. If you never got into it that much, you didn't really hear what was being said over the pulpit. You never looked back on old stuff like Journal of Discourses. You weren't involved with the Relief Society. Do you remember the 3rd hour meeting where we every year took a new prophet?
Yeah.
We should have included that in our patriarchy episode, because think about it. We always talk about how the Relief Society is like this powerful women's organization. And we spent years, at least a decade, going through
each prophet
in the church. I want to say that lasted like 18 years, didn't it?
Yeah. They went from Joseph Smith, I think, all the way to modern day prophets.
So it was years, pretty much our whole married life. I think it started like the 2nd or 3rd year we were married. Yeah. So like in the late 90s. And so here we are in Relief Society, this supposed powerful female organization, and we're spending the whole time studying the prophets.
Yeah, we never, I think, talked to...
Who are all men.
I was going to say Emma, who is probably the most like notable figure that we have within the church. We've never had a conversation with her in third hour or anything.
I wonder why. You couldn't have a conversation about Emma and exclude the commentary from Brigham Young.
Well, we could go into Zena Young too. She was one of the Zina, which was one of the first Relief Society presidents with
Zina. Let's see if I can do it. Zina Huntington Jacobs Smith Young.
Yeah, she has a lot of last names.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, I feel.
Okay, so I want to get into the topic on families. We're going to take some questions from the community. One of the questions I'm going to paraphrase because I actually didn't get permission to ask the question, but I get questions in my inbox all the time. And it's pretty detailed, but I thought it was very, very interesting. A woman who talks about her daughter who got baptized as a young adult, and her daughter's raising her family in the church. And she wants to know how to talk to her daughter about some of this stuff that she's seeing. The woman has never been Mormon, so we're going to dig into that. But before we do, can I just say, I really want to talk about this picture that I saw online the picture of a guy sitting out in front of a temple by himself, and it has the caption, just a dad sitting outside the temple while his daughter's inside getting married.
Yeah, this is the harm, right? We talk about the harm. Marriage is a significant life event, and having a parent not part of that, to me, is devastating.
And from the outside, to think that an organization is able to dictate that a father cannot attend his child's wedding ceremony seems so beyond ridiculous to me. Because if you think about the reasons that he wouldn't be able to attend, it's either A, he's not a member of the church, or B, he's got a worthiness issue, either because he hasn't paid his tithing or because maybe he masturbated or looked at porn. I mean, it could have been a really small thing. And this is the way that the church divides families systematically. Just this one example of how a father would have to sit outside of the temple while his child is in there getting married. And you know that every day somewhere in the world, this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the church has changed a bit, right? You can get married now outside of the temple and don't have to wait a year to get married in the temple. When we first got married, you would have to wait a year if you got married outside the temple before you can get a temple sealing.
This is true, although the emphasis is not supposed to be on the secular wedding day.
Yeah, that's
the
true
emphasis is supposed to be on the sealing.
Yeah, yeah. And so family's the most important thing for the church, right? That's what they keep on saying. The eternal family's the most important.
If you keep our rules, you can be together. Yeah, so here's one more thing. Have you ever considered the fact that the church always talks about eternal families, but what the church is actually saying is that they don't believe that families are forever unless you do what we say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So what happens with those family members that are not following?
Right.
How do they
and every single family has that.
Yeah.
So I think these are good dynamics to get into before diving into our questions for today, just because the church, from my perspective, is actively harming families and dividing families. And the members of the church that don't allow this to happen, they're like, no, we let our queer kids into the house with their partners. We're very loving. These members of the church who are amazing are the exception, because that's not what the intention of the church is. The intention of the church is for everyone to fall in line with their prescription.
Yeah. The structure works really well when everybody's obedient.
Exactly.
And following the church. When you have someone that's queer, LGBT, that doesn't fit within the mold, or has someone that has deconstructed and stepped away from the church, it becomes very problematic for the family, because how do you fit in eternally with that family? That's their mindset.
Right.
Right. That's not our mindset, but that's their mindset. And we know that we're constantly being judged because we're not in that eternal perspective.
Exactly. And even when we talk about, like, if someone has an experience with a bishop, like let's say they fell behind on their tithing and they're trying to get caught up and they have a wedding coming up, like a child getting married, and the bishop takes their temple recommend because they're behind on their tithing. Or maybe it's because they weren't wearing their garments and they said, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm struggling with drinking coffee. And that bishop takes away their temple recommend. A lot of people will say, well, that was just a bad bishop. But that was a bishop that was keeping the rules.
Yeah, keeping the rules out.
A bishop who allowed you to go to the temple when you only paid minimum tithing and you weren't wearing your garments and you were drinking coffee. I'm sorry, but you won bishop roulette, because that's not what bishops are trained to do. That is a bishop that was arguably breaking rules.
Yeah, we know bishops that haven't allowed people into the temple because they haven't paid their tithing, and then they had to go back and pay previous year's tithing, which to me is ridiculous. Like, we
know people now this didn't happen to us, but there are bishops that are accountants and will hold ward members accountable based on their tax returns. Have you seen that thread in the Mormon Stories group?
No, I haven't.
Someone talks about that. If you're in the Mormon Stories group, there's a thread somewhere in there that talks about someone saying they held me accountable because of my taxes. and they knew how much I made and wouldn't allow me to declare my tithing, full tithing because of that.
If this was all true, then hey, that's the structure you live in. But because this is all bullshit, that has now become harmful for people.
That is exactly it, what you just said. I just got a message from someone that I'm going to be hopefully interviewing soon. Her name's Lori Ship. She's got an incredible story. And she says, you're willing to do all of these things for the truth. But once you learn that it's a lie, those are a lot of sacrifices that most people aren't willing to make for a lie.
Yeah.
So what's in that box better be true.
Yeah.
To make these sacrifices that you're making with your family, with your finances, with all of your life decisions.
And that's the consent that we've talked about. Like if the church was open and honest and transparent with their history, with what they're doing, then you have consent. They haven't been open and honest with their history. They haven't been open and honest in some of their decision making, and they purposely hide it from the members. And so you lose that consent.
Right.
And then it separates the families because of that.
Absolutely. Okay, so the first question is one that I'm paraphrasing, but it's a mom who's not a member. Her adult daughter got baptized. She now has a family. And this woman is wondering, is there a way to talk to my daughter about some of this stuff that I'm finding? Now, the piece of information that's relevant to this conversation is that she says she thinks that her daughter might be becoming disillusioned. So with that in mind, is there anything she can do or say to help her daughter to see these things, to look in the box, to deconstruct?
I think you're walking a very fine line if you do say something, because what I have seen in the past when someone that's a non-member or an ex-Mormon or post-Mormon, whatever you want to call it, says something to a member, maybe even at the very beginning of a deconstruction, it could pull them into a double down where they're like, I don't want to be like the ex-Mormon over here. And so I need to just go deeper and do my scriptures and pray more. So it could have the reverse effect that she wants. And so there's a potential there and a probability there that it might not be worth that risk.
Yeah, the church has done such a good job of vilifying the deconstruction experience by calling it all kinds of really scary things to make members really afraid of looking in that box. So I agree. I kind of have this imagery of pushing a string. Like there's just unfortunately no way to make someone see it. And
yeah, they have to see it themselves. And her daughter might not even want to share it because she might be embarrassed that she joined the church. But if she started asking questions about like Joseph Smith and saying, negative things about Joseph, or whether or not the Book of Mormon was truly translated, that might give you hints that she is going down that rabbit hole. But once they go down, like once you start jumping in, that rabbit hole is deep, and it's like you're falling. She'll eventually get there. There's very few people that when they jump down that rabbit hole, they come back up and they have a view that they still believe in the church. Even the ones that jump down and still attend the church, their view of truth and the church itself is forever changed. So.
I agree with that. And I think a lot of it depends on what they stand to lose. If it's one person in a family of all active members, it's kind of like being on that bullet train. Like, are you really going to exit a bullet train that has the whole rest of your family on it? Probably not.
Yeah.
And so you're invested in staying in the church. And I think it is a worthy argument that for those people, it might be better off that they don't deconstruct. And as we post this kind of deconstruction content, especially as we get into issues that challenge the church's truth claims like polygamy, Book of Abraham, stuff that's included in the CES letter, you always hope that it falls into the right hands. You always hope that it falls into the daughter's hands, right? And not the one spouse who, if he deconstructs, like the Tom Phillips situation where he deconstructs and none of his family does, and now he's solo. You always hope that this content is going to fall into the hands that are going to help complete a family, that are going to help patch or bridge by at least, like you said, allowing the true believing members to see something that they didn't see before, so that now that they can mend those relationships. But it's hard. It's always a concern of mine that it's going to impact families negatively.
Yeah, I feel like we deconstructed, right, in 2020. And I do feel like some of our friends who, to me, were like kind of nuanced. Yeah. I've seen them more double down than I've ever had in the past. And I don't know if it's because they've seen everybody around them starting to deconstruct. Because here in California, I don't know, how it is with other areas outside of California, but we counted 25 people that were at one point in time in our ward that have now deconstructed. And that's just one ward.
And left the church.
And left the church. And that's just one ward. Like if you multiply that by 20 wards up here in North County area, 30 wards. I don't know how many total wards are in North County, but if you times that by 30 with the number of faithful members in the church, that's a large number.
Yeah, especially considering that those weren't inactive families. Those were families that the church was working really well for. Those were Ward Temple Night families. Now, granted, it was over the course of 10 years, but we counted 25 families who have deconstructed and left the church because they no longer believed that it was true.
These were young women's presidents. These were auxiliary leaders,
seminary teachers, like yourself. Did you want to bring yourself in? Is that the reason? Well, we also have, no, I never became a seminary teacher. Yeah. No, but we do have at least 4 seminary teachers
that's true.
That have deconstructed and left the church.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a bishop and a few bishopric counselors.
Yeah.
And a bishop's wife. And so I only say this because there are different camps. There are people that the church never worked for. They didn't fit the mold. And so they bailed early. Yeah. Maybe they didn't deconstruct, but they bailed early. But it's a different generation of deconstructors now because it's a lot of people like us that we loved the church. I never didn't want to go to church. I always loved going. I loved getting ready. I loved being in the church pews. I loved teaching my primary lessons. I loved everything about it. I always went to gospel doctrine. It was a rare occasion that I missed gospel doctrine. Every once in a while I get into a good conversation in the hallway and miss gospel doctrine. But for the most part, I just loved it. I ate it up. Yeah. And I kind of did the church like I did dance lessons. There's this ballerina mindset that it's not the move that counts. It's the way you do it. It's the technique that you use. It's the way your toe is pointed and the way that your back is postured and everything. That's how I viewed the church. It was this is not a checkmark list. This is the way you do it is everything.
It's a lifestyle.
Absolutely lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and just one thing, if I was to rewind 20, 30 years from now, I don't remember like strong families leaving the church.
Me either.
In the 90s, I don't remember hey, we had one bishopric member leave the church, and then all of a sudden we were trying to figure out what was going on there. But it was one family.
You're like, what the hell happened?
Yeah, now I understand what happened.
He was under the influence of Satan big time.
Well, and that was the message I got back then, too.
Oh, I have to tell you something. I don't think I've told you this. When I was talking to my mom, I was getting ready to do the interview with Sal and Lena on the Peace Out podcast. So I shared this story on that episode. But my mom said to me, when my mom fell into the rabbit hole in 1993 because of reading Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History. And when that happened, she completely lost her faith. And she said, I remember sitting in church and looking around and saying, this entire thing is bullshit. And I think I am the only member of the church who knows about it. She's like, I didn't think anyone else knew. Yeah. There couldn't be anyone in my ward that would understand this experience. And so the idea of leaving the church just didn't exist. It didn't occur to her as a viable option. And so she kind of just puttered out on her enthusiasm, didn't go to the temple as often. We didn't do things like stake conferences and things like that. But she was like, I thought I was the only Mormon that had ever experienced this before.
Yeah.
There was no word for faith crisis.
Yeah.
So you can imagine when I deconstructed how thrilled she was to find all the resources that we were finding, Mormon Stories podcast, Lindsay Hansen Park.
Yeah. We're very healing for us, I
Very
would say.
impactful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the next question. Have you experienced you or your kids losing friends, and how do you find new ones? And she lives in Utah. Great question.
Yeah. I think this is a hard one because as you step away from the church, you have now become this anti-Mormon type of person. And so I do think it will impact your friendships. Some families could be scared of sending their kids over to your house. I do think that's a potential. And we'll go to last week. We had a situation. Alicia's no longer a member. I'm still a member. And we went to the grocery store.
Ran into a few people.
We ran into two people who's still in our ward currently today. And they know us. Like, we've been in leadership callings. They know who we were. You were in a leadership calling with one of them.
Very good friends.
And they walked in and I saw them look and they looked the other direction. It felt very like, why would you not talk to us? Like, and you made the comment, like,
Yeah.
why don't you talk to them?
And I was like, well, you also didn't say hi.
Well,
and I also didn't say hi. And
I
I'm
didn't
fine
say
with
hi
it.
because they looked at me and turned the other direction. Their eyes went in the other direction. And so I'm like, I'm not going to like be an asshole and say, hey, and I've done that in the past, by the way. I've seen some people, I've seen them turn the other, like look at the other direction, and I've called it out. And part of that is we're vocal too. And we were having a conversation with a friend at breakfast and they were like, oh, she still talks to me. And so I thought it was very interesting that like, because this friend isn't vocal as much, and we are vocal, that they would.
Right. So two families from the ward that have deconstructed, one that people will not approach and the other who they're still calling and inviting her to do things.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely because we're so vocal about it. No doubt in my mind. Yeah. I don't think it's personal. I really just think the nature of us talking about this publicly makes it tough. So
going back to kids, if you're vocal, right, and vocal about the harm of the church, the lies within the church, you might be isolated. Your kids might get isolated in that type of scenario.
I will say most people are not as vocal as we are. So that's number one. Number two, the other aspect of this is that if you're not at least somewhat vocal, people might think you're in the category of being offended. Mm-hmm. And to get you back to church, what they need to do is drop by your house unannounced to give you some cookies and to invite you to like the Easter brunch. So that's the other side to this. So I don't know if there's necessarily the best possible way to handle this situation, but I will say that finding new friends, and if you're in Utah, there's a good chance that you'll find ex-Mormons near you. And here's the reality. As members of the church, we're very lazy about making friendships because you're so busy with all of your assignments that for a lot of us, you just have never taken the time to really make friends. And for a lot of people leaving the church, you don't even know how to make friends. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you have to develop that for some people as you step away from the church.
Yeah. I have a friend who went on Bumble BFF and has an incredible community of friends that just blossomed from that. Like a few people that they were connecting with, they got them together for dinner one night and they're like all really great friends now. And there's also communities in the ex-Mormon space. So the Bumble BFF would be an avenue for meeting people just for like a friendship. But if you want ex-Mormon friends, there are Thrive meetups throughout Utah, and there are in other cities. You can also set one up.
Yeah, there's different ways that you can find people. You can go through Facebook.
Yeah.
Too. But a good number of our friends that we've made have come from either TikTok or through Thrive meetups that we've had, and we carry Marco Polo. When we've said this, we carry Marco Polo like groups with them.
Yeah, but I will say again, deconstructing from the Mormon faith, you do have to learn how to make friends.
Yeah.
It's not easy. That is a definite learning curve.
And going back to your kids, it might be difficult for them during that period of time. And you might have to, in Utah, look around for people. But I think at some point in time, like our middle child, he still gets together with his Mormon friends. So
that's a good point.
He hasn't been fully isolated, even though that we're so vocal.
A lot of his friends are like part member families. And so the kids are comfortable around people like us.
Yeah. Some are very active. Both parents are very active, and they still, at least they still come around the house, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, good people.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's everyone. And I still think your kids might have friends that will be Mormon if you're in Utah. I think that's totally fine as long as they feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. Utah is different animal, man.
Yeah.
The friendship groups in Utah, we have a lot of good friends that live in Utah. I feel like the dynamics there are just very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Being a member of the church, a lot of your associations are just by virtue of your calling and your ministering assignments. So when you leave the church, all of a sudden you kind of have to be willing to coordinate things. If you want to have friends, you have to be willing to start a book club or have
you have to reach out.
Date night, girls' night out, whatever it is. But yeah, you might have to be the one to facilitate that.
Well, and we facilitated we facilitated a Halloween party. We facilitated a Christmas party.
The really cool part about this for ex-Mormons is that everyone else is likely in the same boat as you.
Yeah.
So they're like, you're having a Halloween party? That sounds amazing. Thank you for doing that. I've wanted to get together with friends, but I have no idea where to start. And so if you do start organizing just a couple times a year, have a big event or attend a big event, you're going to meet people and, and then that's all it takes. You meet one or two people that you really connect with, and you can stay connected through Marco Polo. There's lots of ways to stay connected.
Well, and John talks about you develop your pods, right? At some point in time, you start developing a core group, and you start then hanging out with that core group. And then maybe you don't need the big community events anymore. But,
And as you learn, you will teach your friends, because I have to say that I have learned to be a friend by friends in the ex-Mormon space that have modeled that for me. And I'm super grateful for it, because I feel, looking back, that I didn't know how to be a good friend. And I'm sad about that, because I met some amazing people in the church, and I just never really knew how to be a good friend. And I was probably a lazy friend too. So now that you have, your plate is freed up, you don't have all of your callings and everything that you're doing, your long list of assignments.
Entire Sunday, you got a whole Sunday back.
Yeah, you can use your Sundays to get together with people. Yeah. And the other thing is that I've learned, it doesn't have to be a full orchestration. You can call people and be like, we're headed to the beach. Do you want to go? Mm-hmm. Just a couple of days ago, Sal and Lena were at the beach here by Torrey Pines, and Lena texted me and said, hey, we're at the beach if you want to stop by. And it didn't work out timing wise to get there. But that's the kind of thing that you kind of have to learn how to do. We can fly by the seat of our pants sometimes. We can just like run over there real quick and get together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, here's a good one. How to respect a TBM spouse as an ex-Mo. So TBM stands for True Believing Mormon. So how to respect your true believing Mormon spouse as an ex-Mormon. I've told him the history plus my own pain, still TBM.
Yeah, that's hard.
So I would default to the first answer that we gave about the mom and her daughter and how you really can't push a string. You can't force someone to look inside the box. But I will say, after talking to Sally and Lena the other day and hearing how Sally and Shane did this, so Shane deconstructed first. Shane and Sally were married at that time, and they were going to a chemotherapist. So that stands for physically and mentally out. So this is a therapist who is LDS. They attend church, but they're not fully believing. They facilitated an environment for Sally so that she could look in the box and deconstruct. And she said within 5 days, she had completely deconstructed. So this is an option where one spouse is able to say to the other one, hey, look, our marriage is about to fall apart. This part member thing is not working well. You don't respect me. If you would just look in the box, maybe you would see that we've got our whole lives in front of us. This could change everything. And if you look in the box and you don't believe what's there, we'll be exactly where we are now. But why not at least look in the box? Why not at least do the deep dive? And actually, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, we do know a number of couples that have done this with their spouse. And Sally talked about doing this with Shane with the help of a therapist.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a couple others that were like that went and saw a therapist. I think one of them saw Natasha Helfer in that situation because they were, one had no longer believed and one was dropping down the rabbit hole, but came back up, and they wanted to, work with a therapist on how they can navigate this mixed faith.
So there
marriage.
are therapists that will do this. And Sally said that it was very important to her because she was really resisting the faith crisis. And so she was kind of doubling down. And she said it was really important to her that they went to an active member therapist. And that active member was able to facilitate her deconstructing.
The only thing I would say about that is not, if you go to an active member therapist, they might have a very different view. And so
probably depends on the therapist.
Yeah, it depends on the therapist. And I think it depends on how important that relationship is to you beyond the deconstruction. So, but it's difficult. Like, you can't force anybody to deconstruct, and it's going to be painful and hard if you push and push and push, because they could double down too, like we were talking about, and go the other way. So
we have friends in our stake who told us the experience of how one of them had deconstructed and the other one was going by herself constantly to the ward by herself after he had left the church. And he eventually said to her, this is not going well. And if you love me, you will at least look at this stuff. And I believe he sent her to LDS discussions. Am I right on that?
I don't know. The one thing I want to say around this too is it might not just be with a partner or a significant other or a husband or a spouse. It could also be with your siblings and also with your children. And so you have to take this path very gently, I would say, unless you don't care about those relationships. And it's hard during a faith deconstruction because you're very angry at the church. You're angry in general around a lot of things, and you get triggered. And so it's very easy to come unhinged, or as you would say, dysregulated, and say things that you regret. I have that scenario with me and my family. There's things that I have said that I feel like I could have handled a lot better. But I also feel like my siblings didn't hold space for me. Like, I have one of them that called me up and asked me to remove my nephew
on Facebook.
And that was very painful for me. Very painful for me. Very frustrated that this person would even ask that question. Partially because I'm trying to be authentic with myself and be upfront and forward with the situation. He was on a mission, and I get like the influence that they were concerned about, but part of this, I feel, is the responsibility. The church should own that responsibility. All I'm sharing is truth claims. And so for them to disconnect from Facebook because of truth claims is painful.
That reminds me a lot of the commentary from Elder Renland. I think it was Elder Renland that posted about having COVID. And he said, at least it's COVID and not the virulent virus of basically a faith crisis.
Yeah.
And so that is how you are treated.
Well,
you're treated like you have a virus. And to the extent that, could you please unfriend my kids because I don't want them exposed to you because you could rub off on them. You could get them sick.
Or I'm not going to even tell you that there are mission calls coming up. So stuff like that.
Tough.
Yeah, that bothers me. And right now those relationships are strained because of that.
One thing I'd like to just drive home, maybe for the conclusion of the episode, is that very often family members will fight because of these difficult dynamics. And this is very often the case in a toxic family system. The person who is responsible, nobody's pointing their finger at them. People are pointing their finger at each other. And in this situation of deconstructing, if there's one thing that we can remember, is that everyone in the church, everyone in the family who's participating in the church that is behaving this way, it is a result of their indoctrination.
Yeah.
They're all a product of the system.
Yeah. That's one of the big downloads I got. We have to be careful blaming the person because they're within the system and they're operating within the system. What should be blamed is that system, the church. The church should be blamed. The problem is members, I find, take things personal. When you come after the church, they take it personally as you're coming after them. And they're afraid that whatever influence that you have might influence them or the people around them. And so they will disconnect because of that. And that's sad because like when do we ever have that situation happen? If we disagree, normally we disagree, put it on the shelf or put it on the side, and we still can meet as friends or as acquaintances. I find with the church, they take it so personally that you can't have follow-up conversations, that the relationships become strained. For ex-Mormons too, I think we take things very personal and sensitive too. I think it's on both sides. And so it's very difficult. At times I felt like both ex-Mormons and Mormons, like the two groups, it's very hard for them to coexist.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to solve, like I have thought of, how do you solve those issues? But the ex-Mormons, they struggle. There's triggers that the religion brings up, the system brings up with them that causes them to be angry, frustrated, and pull away. The same thing on the Mormon side. They get frustrated and angry because of the way the ex-Mormons are living, and so they pull away. I just don't, how do you bridge build? I think it's very difficult.
It is very difficult. When the church is actively working to vilify people who've left and to vilify the deconstruction experience, it makes it really tough. As soon as that stops, and those are all those are the reason that people call it a cult, because those are features of a cult. Your religion should be a dimension of your life that makes you a better person.
Yeah.
When a religion focuses on divisiveness, you're going to have problems. And so I think this dynamic you're talking about between Mormons and ex-Mormons, it's only going to heal as the church leadership makes it a priority for cohesion and inclusion and connection with everyone. And they've got to get people like Brad Wilcox off of the stand, people that are talking about how you can't have joy, and people who leave the church are just drama, and it's like a virus, and they're so rebellious, and they're so not happy. And it's like, well, I wonder why we're not happy. You are persistent in painting this picture of me that divides our family.
I was going to say, in high demand religions, I think this is very common. And like other religions, I've seen other religions where you can step away from that religion and maybe not believe in that religion, but still participate with everybody around them that's like orthodox in that religion.
Right.
And in Mormonism, because of the dehumanization that goes around, and that you can't feel joy, that you'll never make it to the celestial kingdom, that you'll not be part of the eternal family, those messaging really hurts the people who are on the outside. And it's bridge building is very difficult at that point in time.
Absolutely. So I just look at all this deconstruction content as bridge building. And the goal of this isn't to just get people out of the church, but it is to bridge that connection between Mormons and ex-Mormons and never Mormons, and just make it there needs to be a safe way for people to leave where they can have their dignity intact.
And that's the whole reason why we're doing this podcast. That's the whole reason why you did your TikTok, is for the idea of bridge building.
Yeah.
Now, does a lot of members take it offensive? Yes. But at least we're trying to bridge build with like the other people who are stepping outside the cave. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my friends, thanks for joining us on another episode of Faith Unraveled. As always, if you want to send us a question, please submit it on Instagram. We are Faith Unraveled, and I check my DMs regularly. And we love getting questions from you, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.